When the area was first declared, the statutory structure in New Jersey is that you have to declare an area in need of redevelopment. When the area was first declared in need of redevelopment, no one objected. And when you see what the area looked like, you'll get a sense that it was an area in need of redevelopment. It was the highest crime rate in the city of Long Branch. Long Branch is well, who had dinner there last night? Yes. Long Branch is an urban center of the Jersey Shore. It experienced decline probably for 20, 30, or 40 years. And the municipality made a judgment that they needed to do something about it. I'll pause there, and when we get to the pictures, we'll talk some more about it. Now, this is a little bit more of the legal lesson. This is a case called Berman v. Parker. If you're really bored at night and you can't sleep, give me your card, I'll send it to you. It's only 8 pages long. It was decided by the U.S. Supreme Court. It was coincidentally decided November 22, 1954. I remember the date because that was 9 years before Kennedy was assassinated. So that was, just to give you some context, it was decided more than 50 years ago, almost 60 years ago. It was written by Justice Douglas, who was one of the more distinguished members of the court. And it goes back far enough that Douglas was appointed by Franklin Roosevelt to the U.S. Supreme Court. It was a unanimous decision. Again, as I said, it's only 8 pages. And it makes for interesting reading because it was that case that was the basis for the Supreme Court's decision in Kelo, as well as another case, which I'll just mention because it's particularly interesting. But Berman v. Parker dealt with redevelopment in the city of Washington, D.C. And if you knew Washington in the 1950s and 60s, it was a hurting place. It was an urban center, experienced a great deal of decline, doesn't have the economic investment, didn't have the economic investment then that it's seeing now in tremendous amounts. And there was an area that was unquestionably blighted. And there was a furniture store owned by Mr. Berman in the middle of that neighborhood. And by everyone's definition, that furniture store was not blighted. It was in good shape, it was well maintained, and it was a viable business. And the U.S. Supreme Court was confronted by the question of whether the power of eminent domain could be used to take that property. So what the court said is, what is in the public interest is for the legislature to determine, not the court. So the court said, we'll defer to the legislature. In this case, it was Congress. Once the legislative objective is established, it is within the legislature's power to determine the means to obtain that objective, including eminent domain. Exercise of eminent domain does not violate the Constitution when property is taken from one private party for redevelopment by another private entity, as the latter may well be better situated to carry out the project. Interestingly, the power can be delegated as with railroads. It rarely is. The governing body need not determine that every property is blighted or substandard on a structure-by-structure basis, and may acquire property not in itself blighted when necessary to effectively carry out a comprehensive redevelopment plan. So that was the essence of Berman's argument, that my property isn't blighted. But the court said, look, there has to be a way of solving these issues. And they took a shot at saying, let's do it on a comprehensive, regional, area-wide basis. Yes?
When you do that, just compensation becomes a problem. Your compensation becomes a real...
Let the mic come over to you so people can hear.
Thrilled to have this happen.
Where are you
We
from?
might have a problem.
Originally Newark, New Jersey.
Newark?
Yes.
And now?
Sparta.
I know Sparta.
I'd rather be in Newark. Just compensation refers to compensation for the building, property, the land, and the improvements.
Yes.
What about the ongoing business? Is there compensation for that that you built in?
Yeah, actually, interesting. Well, you guys know appraisal and valuation. Let me, in part, answer your question with a wise guy answer. You're in Sparta. It's in the Highlands, correct?
I don't think so.
Actually, I think it is.
Well,
Yeah. I'm not sure whether it's in the prohibited or the development zone. But in any event, what's your name?
Ken,
Ken. We created a partnership, Ken and Bob, and we bought farms. And the zoning before the Highlands legislation would have let us build 1,000 homes. and figure a door is worth 50,000 bucks. Our property is worth a lot, correct?
And they destroyed it with that.
Okay, and what's your compensation? You can build a home on it now. We had 1,000 acres. You can build one home on that. Was it a taking?
Was it a taking?
Yes.
No, it's a
Regulation.
regulation that effectively is a taking.
Right. But the Supreme Court of the United States and New Jersey has said
Doesn't see it that way.
it's not a taking. So what is the compensation entitlement of Ken and Bob's partnership?
Not sure.
0. We can build a house. We have use of our property.
But now we take as business.
Okay. Well,
That's
we
not
have...
referring to, I'm not referring to residential, I'm referring to commercial.
Fair enough. Okay, we take a business. Marathon. Chuck, do you know the Marathon case? Okay, Sabrett Hot Dogs?
Yeah.
They were in Jersey City, I think.
Right.
And the property was taken. And it's interesting because the New Jersey legislation dealing with redevelopment provides for relocation expenses. And they found a new facility. Their business was not necessarily grounded in Jersey City, so they could relocate and keep their market share and keep their distribution system. But it was a very significant amount of money to fit up the new facility. So they got compensation, and they fought over compensation for the land and improvements, but they also fought over compensation for the relocation, and they were ordered to receive $2.5 million just for the fit up of the new facility, which was what they claimed
Ordered by who?
by the courts.
My question is, we have to go to court for it to get compensated for this, or can it, or is it part of the taking?
It is part of the compensation entitlement under the statutes. So the municipality has the obligation to reimburse for relocation costs. There was a dispute, as there is on valuation, over what the relocation costs were. Ultimately, it was determined to be essentially what the affected party claimed it was. Interesting.
And
Now-
who puts that claim in? Because as appraisers, we're appraising real estate.
Right.
We're not appraising the business guy.
I would assume probably business type appraisers, accountants, put that in. Now, interestingly, on the relocation issue in New Jersey, the residential situation, whether it's, well, pretty much tenant situation, the numbers date back to the 1960s. So the irony is, so a business has a basis for getting reasonable and fair compensation for the relocation costs. Unfortunately, the current statutes have numbers going back to the 60s and 70s. So those are grossly inadequate in terms of relocation expenses as an entitlement to residents. That's something that needs reform. But the noteworthy thing is that what you were seeing before the market collapsed was that developers were being far more creative about how to deal with property acquisitions. So, for example, I was involved in a project in Belmar where we said we would create something called a presumptive redeveloper. There's a block in Belmar, it's a commercial block. One of the property owners was a savvy real estate person, and he said to them, look, the power of eminent domain is available to us, but why don't you guys see if you can get together. You have the savvy, you have the resources to do it. Come up with a plan that makes sense, consistent with the vision of how this property should be redeveloped. And they were working on it. They combined their interests. Anybody remember the New York Knicks when they were champions, 1969, 1970? If you took the individual parts, it wasn't that valuable, but they were the perfect team. They were the dream team of the right guys in the right places, and together they were the champions. Well, the same idea. You take these guys, you put them together, they assemble the property together, they get the value of the assembly, and they proceeded to do that. They had negotiations with some major redevelopers. They brought in some capable architects with some vision consistent with what the municipality wanted to develop there. They were on the verge of selling their collective interests. And they did a rational job of determining how they would allocate their respective interests within that consortium. And then the market collapsed in 2006, 2007, and that was the end of it.